this is Felipe de Laos at Washington Square News, and this is Op-Ed Live. With us today are Laura Adkins, the president of TorchPAC, and Megan Powers, the vice president of the College Republicans. We will be discussing Netanyahu's visit to the United States and the Iran deal. So, tell us, was Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at Congress last week, was it appropriate for him to come and give that speech?
I do think it was appropriate. Speaker Boehner is well within his power to invite one of our allies to come speak. And I think that it was a conversation that was necessary because, as you can see, we're having this conversation. A lot of people are now talking about this deal with Iran, which is something I don't think would have happened without Netanyahu coming. So I think that the leadership in Congress thought it was necessary, and I think it's really helped bring about a productive conversation.
While I don't necessarily think that the speech was out of line, I do think it's troubling for a few reasons. I think that, first of all, with the Israeli elections coming up this month, it was kind of inappropriate for Congress to bring someone who is in the midst of campaigning for re-election. However, I think that the topic is vital enough that the speech was very necessary. Not just because of the Iranian sanctions over their nuclear program that are being discussed, but also because of a few things he highlighted about Iran being the largest state sponsor of terrorism, which is also a very pressing issue for the U.S.
Well, let's talk about the elections. So some people have said that due to the timing of the speech and of the visit, it's basically a glorified campaign ad, which would be in contradiction with Israeli law. I mean, what do you think about these claims?
This is not the first time that Prime Minister Netanyahu has kind of towed the line between what is acceptable campaigning under Israeli law. I don't think that this crosses that line. However, I think it's a conflict of interest for him to both be speaking to an issue that's vital to both the U.S. and Israel, while also being worried about his image. If the Iranian sanctions program that Obama's team is currently negotiating fails, this will be viewed as a victory for Netanyahu. A big part of his campaign is that he doesn't want a deal with Iran under the current parameters that Obama's team has set up. So the idea that a U.S. policy effort failing will work to his benefit is a little bit troubling.
I don't think the interests can be separated in that. It might be a conflict of interest, but also it's so overlapping. He's very committed to having this deal that Obama is proposing not pass, and his people that agree with that can see that he's fighting for them. So it definitely is a kind of a gray area, but I understand the heart of it.
The good part about this speech is certainly that it's bringing to the forefront of the national attention these issues over Iran, which are certainly pressing and need to be highlighted. The bad part is that the speech is polarizing both within the United States and in Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu got off the plane and kind of proclaimed that he spoke for all Jews and all Israelis, which, as someone active in both communities, is not necessarily the case. But also, this conversation about whether or not his speech was justified is almost detracting from the key issues. Is the Iranian deal, as it stands, beneficial for the U.S. and for Israel? Is Iranian state-sponsored terror being addressed appropriately in the U.S.? These are the real core issues, and I think the speech is kind of detracting from some of those.
So is it? So is the deal beneficial, do you think?
So one of the troubling parts about the deal currently on the table is that it only has a 10-year time frame, and it allows Iran a breakout period of 1 year, which means that Iran, under the deal that's being negotiated, would only be a year away from developing a nuclear weapon. That is troubling. However, I don't think that efforts to undermine the negotiations are going to have the effect of scaling back the nuclear program or scaling back the other things that Iran does.
Well, I mean, though the language kind of literally does scale it back in the sense that there will be, Iran's goal of 190,000 centrifuges will not be attainable, and they will have at most maybe between 5,000 and 9,000 centrifuges running. So is that not enough?
So the issue we saw is that the last time that Iran came to the negotiating table between 2003 and 2005, the deal that was negotiated was aimed at keeping centrifuges at 3,000, and we've seen it increase exponentially. they also have been pretty successful at circumventing the international inspections that these negotiations were designed to put in place. So what is troubling is the idea that Iran has already proven that it can circumvent diplomatic negotiations, which is why a lot of people in Congress are pushing for sanctions if the deal isn't strong enough.
On one hand, it seems that the proposed deal is a way to kind of to buy more time, to buy 10 more years, to see what the situation is like in 5 years, put this back on the table, talk about it more. But on the other hand, you have people who are saying, this is a bad deal, this is worse than no deal. And I kind of wonder, is that true? To what extent is that true? Because, if we pass a deal, whether it's the deal now or a different or something else with more sanctions, what is going to stop Iran from kind of going on its own, which I think is sort of what you're suggesting.
Right. I think that's the key consideration here are the efforts that are being negotiated. And I mean, the negotiating team is going on March 15th to continue negotiations. So we don't know the full extent of the deal, but I think the concern that it's not strong enough is pretty legitimate.
And so part of the reason, Iran wants to negotiate this deal is for the lifting of the economic sanctions that have been threatening its economy for a while. Netanyahu seemed to insinuate that if these sanctions were lifted, Iran would only get more aggressive, more militaristic. Do you think that this would be a trend, that it would be more aggressive in the future?
I think it's a difficult issue because you always have to balance humanitarian concerns with security concerns. And this is something that's central to life in Israel in general. They're always weighing, the human rights of Arabs and Jews in the region with the security concerns in the region. So this is not a new problem for Israel or the United States as an ally of Israel to have to deal with. I think the true test will be kind of looking back at history. You can see that some of the sanctions have been effective at scaling back the program, but they still are continuing on a trajectory where they're increasing stockpiles of plutonium and uranium. They are not scaling back their nuclear program, and they're getting closer and closer to a bomb. So I guess the answer is we won't really know, but any sanctions need to be done in a smart and responsible manner, which still allow, the free flow of money and goods to the people of Iran without allowing them to develop a nuclear program.
I do think it makes sense that if there are economic sanctions lifted, then Iran will have the ability to become more militaristic because they will have more money to be able to build up that military. So I think that also is a good point. It's very complicated.
Or would you consider that rhetoric is kind of fear-mongering, maybe? Maybe, it's not...
It's so interesting to call something fear-mongering because I think it distracts from the point of it. Perhaps something does induce fear, but maybe it is a good point. I think it's so hard to say, this is what the future is going to hold. This is what it might hold, because it might, but it also might not be that bad. But should you give someone the whole picture? That's the complicated thing about this political rhetoric in a very serious, negotiation situation, that there's so many different opinions on just how they're being talked about in the media, and not so much perhaps talking about the actual deal.
Okay. Should Congress have any kind of direct involvement in the deal? Should Congress have an input?
Well, as we were talking about before, it's not just the United States that is making these negotiations, but I think that, the United States Congress, as elected by the people of the United States more recently than the president, I think that it would make sense for the United States to be in agreement, or as much in agreement as the United States can be on anything, confident behind whatever the leadership puts out. So do I think Obama should take Congress's opinions on the deals? I kind of do, because I think even if they feel heard, then at least it'll be more supported.
So the issue I have with this, actually today, 47 senators, all Republican, signed a letter to the government of Tehran basically saying that whatever deal you negotiate with Obama isn't necessarily going to be enforceable after his term ends, and basically kind of pointing out that Congress is here to stay, Obama is on his way out, The issue with this, I mean, there are several issues with this. One of them is you can't have all of Congress at the negotiating table. Not all of Congress has the experience, skills, background that is necessary to outline or even understand these types of deals. When you start having congressional interference in diplomatic policy in general, I don't think it's helpful. I do think that once a deal is passed, or if the deal fails at the end of the month, things like the Kirk-Menendez bill, which advocate for sanctions of Iran if a bill fails, or if a negotiated deal fails, I think that is certainly within congressional power, but I don't think this diplomatic meddling is necessarily good.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Megan, Laura, I appreciate you being here, and this has been Op-Ed Live.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more content like this, you can check us out at nyunews.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at NYU News. And don't forget to have an A1 day.